What's up, everybody? It's your girl, Jess, and I am back with another fake podcast. This was originally going to be a video, but as you know, if you've seen my previous videos, the last two videos, or you follow me on Tumblr, I'm without my main computer right now. And so, you know, without my Sim stories, I have a lot of time on my hands right now. So I decided to look at my list of videos I wanted to make and see which ones I could either get away with doing in my vanilla game or, you know, if I need the game at all. And after looking at my notes for this particular topic, I realized I don't really need my game at all. I can just talk through it. So that is why we have another chapter in my fake podcast series. So we are going to discuss neighborhood rotation stories. This whole conversation, this is the result of tons of questions I have received over the years about how to do rotations. And, you know, like what advice do you have for me getting started with rotations? You know what I'm saying? So to all those people who ever asked a question about how to do rotations, this is for you. So I hope you enjoy it. I have a lot to cover, and as much as I want to do all of this in one episode, I might have to split it up. I'm going to keep my eye on the clock, and if I have to break it up, then I'll just, you know, let you know and stop and start. But I'm going to try and talk as quickly as possible and to not have too many asides. But y'all know me. When it comes to, you know, Sims or writing, I can gab all day and all night. So I'll try to keep it under wraps. To kind of, you know, give myself a little fake clout. Not clout, but, you know, some people might be interested in how I think I am an authority on this topic, and, you know, that's perfectly valid. So I will explain that. I honestly have not written too many neighborhood rotations, but the two I have written, or, you know, the one I'm still writing, I wrote them over many years, and I have a lot of experience writing them, but I have way more experience reading them. I have read tons of neighborhood rotations throughout my Sims 4 life, and I've made several observations. There are certain key things that I've noticed with almost every rotation story I've ever read, and that is how I came up with these guidelines that I use for my own rotation stories. The biggest observation I made that was common through all the stories I read is that most people are unsure of how to organize their rotation to make a coherent and compelling story. A lot of times it's just a random collection of Sims, you know, that aren't related to each other. Sometimes they don't even know each other. Like it's literally a bunch of different stories that someone is just stringing together with, you know, with a title, you know. That's fine to read for a while, but after a minute, it's like, okay, what is the point of this? You know, like why do I have to care about all these characters, you know, especially if you have a lot of them, which we'll get into that later. So that being the key to the issues I saw in other people's stories, that is the basis for these guidelines I'm going to share with you. So let's start off slow and basic and explain what a neighborhood rotation is. You know, maybe you're listening to this fake podcast and you're not one of those people who came to me asking for advice and you're like, a rotation? Oh, is that what y'all call that? You know, if a neighborhood rotation were a TV show, it would be an ensemble cast. And if you're unsure what an ensemble cast is, an ensemble cast has multiple characters that are all actually the main character, you know, because typically there's only one main character, but in an ensemble cast, all of these characters are the main characters, and they all get equal amounts of focus. All of their stories are important and they all get told. In sim stories, if we're agreeing that neighborhood rotation stories are like ensemble casts, then the ensemble, like the group of characters that are going to be the main characters, the ensemble is a group of households that we focus on, and we rotate between the actual literal household, okay? Each individual household has their own individual story that may or may not be separate from the other households. In essence, it's like writing several stories at once, but on a schedule, which we'll talk about later. Before I get into making my suggestions, telling you the guidelines that I use for my own rotation stories, I just want to make a few disclaimers. I am in no way saying that this is the only way to do rotations. I am in no way stealing anyone else's material. If you hear something that sounds like some gameplay challenge you heard of, or, something that someone else wrote, it's purely coincidence. I am just giving you advice from observations that I personally have made by reading multiple stories. And you can take the information I use and forget about it, or use it to your advantage, or whatever you want. But this is basically, just me answering questions I have received and answering them to the best of my ability, given the information that I have from my observations, okay? But if you want to write a story that people can't put down, I do suggest you keep listening. So I have 4 pieces of advice, which of course will come with subpoints, for how you can organize your rotations, make the rotation flow, and write a story that people are going to want to read and keep reading. So the first piece of advice is to choose your households wisely. I'm going to say that again because honestly, that might be the most important piece of advice. Choose your households wisely. It's going to be really tempting for you to pick a random collection of Sims, throw them in a save, and, call yourself rotating between them and writing a story. But that would be a mistake. That is honestly what everyone I have ever read in the past has done. And honestly, like it works for a little while, but after a while, it's like, all right, what is the point of this? And why do I have to care about all these people? And how are they even related? Because they don't even really know each other, So the household should be linked by a common idea, a person, a theme, and the readers need to understand why you've chosen these people, these Sims, and how they're related and why they have their own story. And the Sims need a reason to run into each other or form relationship or even become enemies. Like nothing should be random in a rotation story. That's what happens in a lot of stories I've read in the past. As an example, I will use the first rotation story that I wrote. It's called Keeping Up with the Joneses. And in that rotation, I started with 4 houses. There was the Joneses, the Pancakes household, the Pruitts, and then there was this rando townie household the MC Command Center moved in without my permission because back in the day, I didn't have my settings all fine-tuned like I do today, I was really mad about that. But I decided to keep them and, add them into the mix. I figured it could be fun, and it was, it worked out for a while, but I eventually got rid of them, but I'll tell you about that later. The common thread between all these houses was that they were neighbors. I did a literal neighborhood rotation. They all lived in the Courtyard Lane neighborhood in Willow Creek. So not only were they physically connected, by living on the same street, I had them meet once a month for a homeowners association meeting that took place at the Pancakes house. So not only were they connected by, their address, but they were also physically connected at least once a month because I had them all in the same location. And of course, things would happen at the meeting, so they would each go away to their own households and they would talk about it and they would gossip about it. And you know, even though they weren't physically together and even though they had their own stories to tell, they were still held together by this neighborhood gossip that was continuous throughout the entire story. Some of them formed relationships with each other, while others were kind of standoffish and never really connected with anyone, but that is how I connected them. The second suggestion I have is to limit your households. Rotations are best when you can actually rotate. A lot of people that I've read in the past, they call a full rotation a round. So a round or full rotation, it's when you have gotten through all the households and then you're back to where you started. So like you start with one household, you go to the next and the next and the next, and then you're back to where you started. That's one round. So what I'm saying is rotations are best when you can have multiple rounds. Having too many households make the rounds very long. And if they're too long, your readers might actually forget about what happened at the previous households. Now, true, your readers are going to forget things in general because, you know, if you don't post consistently, and that's all of us, I mean, like I post a lot, but even I am not consistent with it. You know, like things happen, you know, no one cares about your story like you do. You know everything there is to know about your story, and you remember every single thing you've ever written, but no one else is going to know your story like you do. So, you know, in general, people will forget things, but if you prolong the process by having too many households, like your readers can't hold everything in their brains because they have other stories they're reading as well. You have to keep that in mind. So they're going to forget things, and then you're going to have to remind them. And, you know, it's just not a good experience for the reader. I could do an entire podcast about how paying attention and caring about the needs of your reader will do so much for you as a writer. But we're not doing that today. So not only will they forget about what happened at the previous households, but also you'll leave matters unaddressed. And you'll have to resolve them in future rounds. But they're not even going to remember that, you know, this particular issue wasn't even resolved. And when you go back to resolve it, they're like, oh, well, I forgot all about, you know, so-and-so cheating with so-and-so, you know. You don't want that, you know. You don't want to make your reader forget anything if you can help it. The readers need to remember things because, you know, the nature of rotations, you know, you will leave lots of cliffhangers. You know, that's just the nature of them. But you need to make it so that they'll remember what previously happened. So make the rotations relatively short. Like I said before, when I started Keeping Up the Joneses, I started with 4 households. But after a few rounds, I quickly noticed that the pacing was off. Like, okay, that story was pure gameplay. You know, I did very little plotting in that story, and when I did, it was toward the end. But even though it was gameplay, like I had a certain story that was going on in my head to keep things going along so I could write it in a way that, you know, made things coherent. Like I had a certain time when things should happen, and, you know, because the rotation was so long, it just kind of knocked things off kilter, and, you know, things didn't happen when I thought they should. And, you know, like I found that 4 households was just too much for me. So MC Command Center in all of its glory presented me with an opportunity to get rid of the random townie household that I didn't even want there to begin with. So I ended their story and I kicked them out the neighborhood, which of course kicked them out. Well, actually, even though I kicked them out of the neighborhood, they actually stayed in the story via gossip because MC Command Center made them related to one of the characters, one of the Pruitts. So they were always gossiping about that household. So even though she wasn't in the story anymore, she still was in the story. I love that. Anyway, I played with 3 households for a long time. I noticed that 3 is my sweet spot, and I'll tell you why in the next piece of advice. But my time is quickly approaching 30 minutes, so I'm gonna stop here and continue with the other 2 points in the next episode. Stay tuned.